So who's been the better coordinator to this point in the season for Penn State? Andy Kotelnicki or Tom Allen? I know who everybody's probably thinking, but objectively, that's not the case.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. My name is Zach Seyko. I am your host of the show, and help me welcome back a very special guest. That is the voice of Penn State football and men's basketball on the other side. But for the purposes of this conversation, football most importantly here, Steve Jones making his return from Southern California. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And we're going to open up this conversation comparing and contrasting Andy Kotelnicki and Tom Allen and the impact they've had on the offense and defense respectively before we talk about some second half breakout players and early thoughts on Wisconsin. I encourage people to comment their thoughts down below about Andy Kotelnicki and Tom Allen, who's had the bigger impact. I think it's safe to say most people are going to say Andy Kotelnicki when you compare and contrast 23 to 2024. But Steve, when you actually look at the data, the stats, the offense and the defense are producing similar results in terms of yards per play. And if you look at the analytics, Pro Football Focus actually has the defense performing better than the offense overall. I think that's crazy.
Well, let's talk about Tom Allen for a moment. Let's start with him. Think about how he wanted to play all spring and how he wanted to play all preseason and how he did play in the West Virginia game and the first quarter of Bowling Green. He had KJ Winston. By having KJ Winston, he then was able to take Jalen Reed and put him in the lion position, which, as you saw in the West Virginia game, you want to talk about somebody excelling and being made for the position. It was Jalen Reed. But after Winston got hurt and went out of the game, Tom Allen had to change everything about how he played on the back end of the field, because now he had to play Zakee Wheatley and Reed as the safeties, and they had to use really a nickel back and sometimes dime, whether it was Cam Miller or Zion Tracer or an Elliott Washington or somebody in that role. And the lion role essentially was a loose role to this point. And the fact that he made that kind of adjustment on the fly, considering he had already planned how he wanted to play the season in the spring and in the preseason, I think one of the last things he expected, or at least one of the last things he thought might happen, would be that he would have an injury back there that would change how he wanted to play that lion position. And he's done a great job of adapting to it. Sometimes going with three linebackers with Don DeLuca out there, sometimes going with the five defensive backs, sometimes going with six. He's done a great job of how he's utilized and moved Abdul Carter around, especially on third down, where Carter sometimes is sitting in the middle, and every quarterback sitting there like going, okay, wait a minute, where is he? Where is he? So Tom should get a lot of credit for making a big adjustment schematically, because the scheme perfectly fit having Winston back there and having Reed at the line spot, and he had to make an adjustment to it. It was a big adjustment. Andy Kotelnicki has done a great job of utilizing his personnel and getting the most out of his personnel formations, because he has a big man like Venga Ioane that can move. So you can send him in motion, and it makes a big difference. He has two running backs that can catch the ball, and Singleton's improvement as a receiver has made a big difference in this offense. The fact that he's had receivers step up. I mean, they've had four different guys get 100-yard receiving games. Trey Wallace, Amari Evans, Liam Clifford,
Right.
and, of course, Tyler Warren. But look at Julian Fleming, the 2 fourth down catches he made against USC that kept that game tying drive alive, where he had just attacked the football. So he's been helped a lot by that, and the fact that he does have versatile tight ends beyond what we see with Warren all the time. But Dinkins returning has been a huge plus. Luke Reynolds is going to be an excellent player for him. So he's been able to take all these versatile parts and he's turned it into something exciting, dynamic, fun, and productive.
And I think those are, of course, all excellent points there. Is bringing up specifically how KJ Winston is going to arguably be the most valuable player. Sure, Abdul Carter, Zane Durant is proving to have a breakout season here. But KJ Winston, what he's able to do in defending the pass as a safety because he's a defensive back, but also just how stout he is against the run. He acts as an extra linebacker. He acts as an extra player in run defense, regardless of where you put him, because he's so good at reading the play, and he's probably, I would say, easily the best tackler on the team. You can attest to that as well, Steve, that KJ Winston's tackling ability had not missed a registered tackle all of his sophomore campaign, and I think before the injury didn't miss one as well this season. I know what everybody's going to say, Andy Kotelnicki, because you look at 2023's results and how Drew Aller's so much better. You're looking at a Nicholas Singleton and a Katron Allen continue to do what they do best, but then having Tyler Warren look like he is, and also look the part of the best tight end in the country, getting breakout performances from an Amari Evans, a Trey Wallace, guys who were, I guess, key role players to an extent last season, can now be called upon at any given time. And I think with Julian Fleming, too, and it'll be great for the second segment, is I think he and Drew just need to get on the same page. I don't think it's a lack of talent. I don't think it's a mistake thing. Anytime I see, a ball thrown behind Fleming, I'm thinking, okay, it's an option route because Drew's not inaccurate like that. But what can be inaccurate is the communication and the timing between somebody who's played a lot of football at Ohio State and somebody who's been at Penn State for the past, going into 3 years. They just got to get on the same page.
Well, I mean, Julian Fleming, to me, had an up and down spring. And I thought the first week to 8-9 days of training camp, I thought he was still up and down. But then they scrimmaged. And when they had a scrimmage from that day forward, he's been outstanding. I mean, not just good. I think he's been outstanding. The odd thing is, going into the USC game, he had one of those Tuesdays where you're like, oh, I haven't seen that in 2 months. Like, wow, I haven't seen that in 2 months at all. And he was the first to tell you, like, I don't know what the heck was going on. And then the beginning of the game, he got called he was the one that was called in the end zone on the Warren touchdown that was taken off the board. He then dropped a ball, and acted like he didn't expect the play. And he was kind of banging his hands, not hard, but tapping his helmet with his hands like, come on. Well, then in the fourth quarter, what you saw with the 2 catches in the fourth quarter were 2 contested balls where he was going to get it and nobody else. Because what I've noticed with Julian Fleming in the last couple of months is he's attacking the football when he catches it. He attacks the ball. And those 2 catches showed him attacking the ball. And then those were just 2 big plays by a guy that plays winning football. You need him to make a block, he makes a block. You need him to run a clear-out route like he did against West Virginia on 2 touchdowns. He's the one that cleared it out with really hard, precise routes. Right? He does that. Then you need him to make a couple of big catches like USC. He did. I mean, he plays winning football, and it's just he has been such a plus on and off the field. Julian Fleming's meant a lot to this team so far.
In short here, when discussing and comparing the offense to the defense, the results are pretty similar. Top 10 offense, top 10 defense in the nation, whether you look at analytics or specific offensive metrics, yards per play allowed. The defense and offense are right there, and we'll see how the second half plays into that because, Steve, I've already said that the better days are ahead for an offensive group and a defensive group that have performed exceptional to this point, and that includes specific second half breakout players. So guys that maybe flew under the radar or didn't perform up to their highest potential, but will have a better second half of the season. Julian Fleming's one of them. We'll talk about some other names on the other side of this break. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more. And it's all on the same page where you place your bets. So it's a convenient, simple setup. And the best part, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's right, guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's all it takes. Your first $5 to get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's over at FanDuel.com. And if you look at FanDuel, the lines have been released for Penn State versus Wisconsin. Penn State is an 11.5-point favorite. The money line for Penn State is minus 480. If you're betting on Wisconsin, it's plus 360, and the total is set at 47.5. If you like those lines, you can bet them right now over at FanDuel.com. Again, that is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So going back to what we had discussed beforehand, Steve, Julian Fleming, I think, is one of those prime breakout candidates, if you will. I just think it's a matter of getting in rhythm, building chemistry continually with a veteran quarterback, somebody that you haven't played with for a long time. That's only going to happen through mistakes in a football game, practice after practice after practice, and it showed up. Not on the same page in the first half, but then key down the stretch on two, not just one, two fourth down conversions against USC. I think it's easy to look at anybody of those young players. Dejon Lane's been brought up a lot, of course, by James Franklin, saying that, hey, it's just a matter of timing. They say they're preparing him, they're getting him ready. I also think of a Cooper Cousins who's been thrusted into action more times now because of, some availability on the offensive line, but just because of how good he is right out of the gate as a true freshman. Luke Reynolds is also going to be an obvious one. So it's all those young players that continually see more playing time down the stretch. Are there any names that immediately come to mind that, through the first 6 games, we didn't really hear from him, but the last 6 games, he's going to have a significant impact on this Penn State team?
I think Amari Evans will. I think Trey Wallace is always an obvious because I think he's really good. But I think Amari Evans will. I think Liam Clifford will. J.B. Nelson will be a guy because of his versatility. It's going to make a difference on the offensive line. Nolan Rucci. He talks about Cooper Cousins defensively. The guys I look at defensively, I think that could, along the line, a little bit more out of Tamir Robinson. I think that who knows how to play. Day Lane certainly is one of them. I think Zion Tracy showed everybody in the USC game he's ready to bust out.
That's a good name. Yeah,
he had an excellent. I thought he had an excellent game against USC, just based on what I saw. And I think of a name that I think has played really well, but we need to talk more about is Dani Dennis Sutton, because Dani Dennis Sutton in the last couple of games has really played well. And I thought he played an excellent game against USC. And, of course, the standout play was the play that he made in overtime where he dropped Woody Marks for a 5-yard loss. They marked it as 3, but the Big Ten officials aren't good at marking the ball. Never have been. But it's just, it's really, they need to go to marking school.
I won't argue with you.
Right? It's like you watch an SEC game, they mark the ball. And by the way, I'm a big Jerry McGinn guy, so I think Jerry's an outstanding official, and he's the one that did the game on Saturday. But those are some of the guys I'm looking at that can break out and make something happen. And Tracy included in the punt return game because I think he has a little bit to him. Now, what he'll have to improve upon is what Caden Saunders already had. Right, and it's so underrated. Where you got to really know football to understand that. Caden Saunders' judgment on punt returns was excellent. Right? He's not giving up the roll that goes 20 yards. He's not giving up, plays like that, where those are the hidden yards you're talking about. He fair catches all the time. That's because the ball didn't go back 20 yards. It may have saved you 10 to 15 there. Right? You got to know football to understand that. Now, do you get a bonus out of a Zion Tracy who can take it? No question. There's no question about that. We saw that with Daquan Hardy last year. But then as the season went along, teams did a better job of kicking around Hardy last year. And you may see that with Tracy once he shows he can break one, because he can. But you also saw a couple times when he's been back there where the ball's hit the ground. You don't need the ball hitting the ground unless it's an obvious Like, just stay away from it. You can't get to it. Judgment means a lot. Two things that mean more than anything on a punt return: catching it and judgment. Right? Anything else you get out of it, gravy. And everybody gets enamored with the gravy.
I think it's also fair to include the starting quarterback in this conversation as well. And it's not because I'm trying to imply that Drew Aller had a bad first half of the season, because he's had a great first half of the season. You see that confidence, that swagger initially in the West Virginia game. Sure didn't have the greatest performance against an Illinois team, but I look at all the other games: Bowling Green, Kent State, USC, obviously, something that a season ago, the offense was never able to bail out the defense. If the defense made a mistake or let up at any point in time, and that was a very rare occurrence in 2023. However, when they did make mistakes, the offense, it seldom was there to pick them up. Now you're seeing it complementary football. The offense is able to capitalize on what the defense does, bail them out if they make a mistake, and play, and the defense is doing the same thing for the offense. And a big part of that is Drew Aller being able to command an offense, not make those costly mistakes, and being able to overcome them when he does. So the 2 interceptions against USC, I don't know in 2023 that Drew Aller is able to overcome that in that instance. But on the road like that, in Los Angeles, 6-hour flight, I mean, I think Drew Aller still hasn't played his best football yet, surprisingly enough, coming off of a near 400 passing yard performance against the Trojans.
I think he's been terrific all season long. I mean, watching him, he looks like a second-year starter. He has real command about what's going on out there. He knows where all the chess pieces are supposed to be. He's making some really good throws, a variety of throws. The way he's used his running backs shows you a lot about his maturity, because you look at the touchdown pass to Singleton that tied the game up in regulation. Mm-hmm. That's the third read on the play. He looks left, then he looks center, and then Singleton's wide open on the right, and he dumped it off to him, and he scored. The throws he made to Fleming were fabulous. The throws he made to Warren, obviously, made 20 of them to him. He caught 17 of them. But that's the way he's been playing all year. He's actually been playing at a high level all year. He looks like a second-year starter. And Andy has done a great job of saying, okay, what is Drew best at? How can we accentuate it? And let's stay away from stuff that he may not be great at. And they've done a great job of that so far. And his ability to run the ball, right?
Yeah.
He has point A to point B speed. I've always pointed that out. And his judgment on when to run has been outstanding. So let's take the game-winning field goal in overtime. Penn State works on situational football all the time. One of the situations they do work on repeatedly during the course of a season is what to do on a final drive when you're driving in and you need a field goal to win. And one of the plays is center the ball. Well, he gets the snap on that play, and he does exactly what he needs to do. And says, hey, and I can pick up some yards too, because there's no clock involved. In the overtime, there's no clock, right? So you're not worried about a clock situation like Will Howard had to worry about with Ohio State against Oregon, right? And then he goes and he gets it right in the center of the field, and that's exactly what Penn State needed. That shows you that the mind has slowed down so much for him. In other words, the game has slowed down for Drew. And that's what happens when you're a second-year starter. And I think that means a lot. Just show he was in complete command of his surroundings, that in the situation that they practiced all the time, they had practiced it on Friday. As a matter of fact, when they were at SoFi, it was one of the things they practiced was that situation. And he was completely in tune with what they needed, because if you go back to Minnesota, North Carolina on opening night, North Carolina's leading. Minnesota's right there. They have a field goal. They don't center the ball. They kept it on the hash, and they missed the kick wide right from their left-footed kicker. All right? Well, Penn State wants to center the ball, and Drew did exactly that. It's amazing how the little things, you take care of that, the big things take care of themselves. That seems like a little thing, but in the moment, it ends up leading to a big thing, and he's been doing all of that.
Now, they're in the middle of the bye week. They're fine-tuning some things, and I think they'll be better prepared because of it for not only the second half of the season, but that road game that is now in prime time. So back-to-back road trips, even though there's a bit of a buffer in there to a tough environment, Camp Randall for the Wisconsin game. Some early thoughts on the Badgers, a team that's starting to peak at the right point in time for Luke Fickell's group. We'll talk about that on the other side of this break. And today's episode is also brought to you by Hims. Your sex life is important, but your schedule is busy. You don't have the time to go to the doctor's office to get treated for ED. Through Hims, you can get a personalized ED treatment without stepping foot outside of your door. Hims is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. Hims provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewable hard mints and Viagra, Cialis, and their generics for up to 95% cheaper. The process is 100% online, so there's no need for those uncomfortable doctor's visits, and no insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That is HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. So as we know, Wisconsin's coming off of that emphatic victory against Rutgers on the road. They played USC pretty tough in the first half. Wisconsin's faced some adversity, losing starting quarterback Tyler Van Dyke to a season-ending injury. Ches Malusi going into opting out of the season and saying, "Hey, I'm going to enter the transfer portal." So your starting quarterback and running back unavailable to you. And now it feels like Luke Fickell and the Badgers are starting to have it figured out. They match up well against Rutgers, so I don't think that blowout victory is necessarily surprising, but it's like, okay, this has everyone's attention. What is surprising to me, Steve, is that, okay, Van Dyke I think is a solid quarterback. I think he has his flaws, but I didn't doubt that he was the starter for a reason with Wisconsin. But Braden Locke, somebody who's kind of struggled with his time at Wisconsin, is outperforming him, maybe not necessarily in completion percentage, but when I look at yards per play, the way that he's able to manage the offense, Wisconsin's getting similar, if not better, production from the quarterback position now with Locke at the helm.
I think Braden Locke has settled in. Everybody at Wisconsin had been saying that the competition between Van Dyke and Locke was close. I wasn't there, so I'm not going to doubt that. Van Dyke, of course, came in with the big name and the resume from Miami, and they're running now the air raid offense. This is not 3 yards in a cloud of field turf pellets anymore.
Very, very true.
Although Tyree Walker did have a 198-yard rushing game against Rutgers, but that's the first 100-yard game they've had rushing from a running back this year at Wisconsin. Walker's a really good player. I think Pauling at wide receiver is really good. He's got, I think, 25 catches already this year.
Yes.
Locke threw for 240 against Rutgers, and he's playing better. You can see he's settled into what they want to do. Their offensive line has played well. Defensively, they run essentially an Oklahoma defense, a 5-2 defense a lot of times, and then they'll get into these situations where it's a 5-1-5. They play a lot of 5 defensive backs, nickel back situations. Vakos, the place kicker, is really good. I think he kicked against Penn State when he was at Ohio University or something like that. And he's a really good kicker. So that they're a good, solid team that lost to Alabama, lost at USC. But then it bounced right back. Purdue helped them bounce back. Rutgers helped them bounce back. They've scored 91 points in their last 2 games. They got Northwestern this weekend, which I think will be one of those good, tough, hard-fought Big Ten games. But I like overall what they have on that team. I think they do some things very, very well.
And even though they've installed the it's a new look for Wisconsin, right? Because they've had, how many decades of that run, and then, we're going to run some more. And you also have the running backs to back it up. I mean, this is still primarily a run first team. And Walker's given that explosiveness. He's the guy that they'll utilize in the red zone as well. It's not to say that they won't pass, but I think understanding that comfortability of Locke is important too, that if you have a solid ground game, to help you out, you're going to feel a lot more confident and comfortable. And I think Drew Aller would say the same thing about Singleton and Allen as well. Like, hey, they help me have some insurance on the back end so that there's not as much pressure. They alleviate some pressure here in an instance when it comes to the offense. And so Walker's been better than a Ches Malusi, who says, you know what, I'm done for the season. Braden Locke is proving to have a comparable performance. I'd argue it's even better to this point than Tyler Van Dyke, even though the unfortunate circumstances of the season-ending injury. And then the defense is interesting too. When I look at that matchup, I think that Penn State, as you mentioned in our second segment, who did you name right at the top of the segment? Liam Clifford, in addition to Julian Fleming, Trey Wallace, Amari Evans, as guys that will continue to get better and have more or less a breakout in the second half of the season. So Penn State's passing attack should be able to have a favorable, most likely it matches up well for them. I won't say never that Wisconsin doesn't put together a good game plan defensively, but I think with Penn State's options at wide receiver getting better, and of course Tyler Warren, that the passing attack could be Penn State's best asset against the Badgers that following Saturday.
Yeah, right now to this point, Wisconsin has 3 interceptions total on the season at this stage, and one of them is by a guy that comes off the bench, a freshman named Dixon. Offensively, one thing we talk about how Penn State utilizes Warren, they don't really utilize their tight ends a lot in the offense to this point. They're very much a running back, wide receiver oriented team. And then, but I also think there's certain guys on that team that when you look at them, I mean, I think up front, they can get some pressure up front. They're pretty good against the run. What UCLA and USC did is they both stacked the box because they were determined not to let Allen and Singleton beat them. I would think that would be part of what Wisconsin wants to do. I think they're going to want Drew Aller to beat them, just like Penn State would want Braden Locke to beat them.
Okay, good luck.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a former 5-star quarterback for a reason, and he's playing like one of the best quarterbacks in the country because Drew Aller is one of the best quarterbacks in the country. And the results, it's really not a subjective thing anymore. Objectively, Drew Aller is a top 10 quarterback in college football right now.
He's playing really well, and he's going to have to continue to play well because now you get Wisconsin, then you have Ohio State, then you have Washington, then you have Purdue, then you have Minnesota, and then you have Maryland. So you just have to keep going on a week-by-week basis. And there was an old saying around here that was drummed into our heads by Joe every year. You either get better or you get worse. You never stay the same.
That's very true. Well said. To finish up this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions, he is the voice of Penn State football and men's basketball. Steve Jones on the other side. Links to his work, his radio show. He has a daily talk show Monday through Friday from 1 to 3, which will be linked down in the description if you're looking for work outside of his Penn State football and men's basketball days. Steve, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate it as always, and especially the insight and analysis to this Penn State football team.
Zach, always a pleasure. You do a great job.
And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. For your second listen and watch, you got to check out Locked On Big Ten with host Craig Sheeman. Everything Big Ten related, all the Big Ten news is talked about on that show. Whether it's Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan, all the schools, all the newcomers from the Pac-12, Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA. There is not a Big Ten there is not a Big Ten stone that is left unturned with host Craig Sheeman. And that's why it's called the Locked On Big Ten Podcast. It's available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. And it's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.